Welcome everybody to today's Twitch session on securing service-to-service communication through gRPC and Kafka. My name is Nuwan Das, and I'm one of the authors of the book Microservices Security in Action, and I authored this book along with Prabhat Sirivardhanan. So just to get started, I'm from WSO2, both myself and Prabhat, and I work as the VP and Deputy CTO for API Management and Integration. And this session will be based on chapters 8 and 9 of the book. In chapter 8, we talk about how you can secure microservices that are communicating with each other using gRPC. And in chapter 9 of the book, we talk about reactive microservices. We talk about its use cases and why we need them. And we talk about how you can use Kafka for reactive microservices and how you can secure communications that are happening with Kafka. So that's basically going to be the rough agenda for this session, and I hope to go through a little bit of presentation and make the session mostly based on demos that will be using samples of the book. All right, so let's get started. So talking about microservices, we all know how popular and dominant microservices have become in the industry over the past couple of years. And so as you know, a microservice is something that takes a particular responsibility in a business architecture and implements that responsibility as a service, which is typically accessed through a network interface. So in a microservices world, there are two main types of microservices, just for the context of this conversation. And these are internal microservices and external facing microservices. So if you think of a scenario where we are trying to build a retail store for an enterprise, and if you think of implementing this retail store or an e-commerce website using microservices, there will be things like there will be microservices such as a microservice for browsing your product catalog in the retail store, a microservice for processing orders, as what we are seeing here, a microservice for keeping your inventory up to date, as the green microservice that you're seeing here, and similar kind of microservices that have various responsibilities. Now, out of these microservices, there will be some which are directly invoked by uh, clients. So clients, in the sense, these could be the various kinds of applications that are accessing the services of our retail store, and they are usually exposed to the outside world. These microservices are usually exposed to the outside world through what we call an API gateway. So the API gateway becomes the entry point, or the first entry point, for any kind of device or application that is trying to access these kind of external facing microservices. So for example, if you think of a scenario where a client is placing an order, so a client would press a button on his application to place the order, and that request would come in from the client device to an API gateway, and the API gateway would do some form of security authentication, authorization, and things like that, and hand over the request to the uh, order processing microservice. Now, the order processing microservice in this case becomes the external facing microservice. So the order service processing microservice would need the assistance of other microservices internally to complete its functions, such as the inventory microservice for updating the inventory once an order has been processed. So as you can see, the inventory microservice is not a microservice that will ever be exposed directly from the outside world. It will always be a microservice that is being used internally by other microservices. So you can see that there are two types of microservices here, the external facing ones and the internal ones. Now, usually the external facing microservices are exposed over protocols like HTTP, because these are exposed, their functionality are exposed to through APIs to developers of different kinds of applications. Could be web applications, could be mobile applications, and so on. So they have to be human readable, and humans should be able to read and understand the contract, the API, and therefore these are usually exposed over HTTP protocols. But for internal microservices, these are for the consumption of other microservices. So these are used, programmed again, yes, by developers themselves, but these are developers who are like within the organization, who understand and know the domain, and therefore they don't necessarily have to be as human readable as such. And another important aspect when it comes to microservices is that usually a microservice architecture ends up with lots of microservices that are communicating with each other over the network. So the resource utilization and performance, the network performance, becomes very important. And that is why this gRPC protocol has become so popular, because it is highly resource optimized, resource efficient. It doesn't take as much resources as traditional HTTP requests, and it is very performant as well. It is very fast in passing messages compared to traditional HTTP, due to various optimizations it has done. And because of the fact that it doesn't have to be as human readable as such, the communication between the internal microservices, gRPC becomes a natural choice for microservices that are communicating with each other within the network, due to the reasons I mentioned. So that is basically why gRPC has become very popular in the industry now, and that is basically why we've decided to talk about how you can secure service-to-service communication that are happening over gRPC. So this is basically the use case of gRPC in a microservices architecture. So let's go directly into some samples and see how we can secure um, microservices over gRPC. So in the example that we just talked about, we talked about a case where the order processing microservice talks to the inventory microservice whenever an order has been processed. So one of the problems with this approach is that there could also be another microservice, what we call a bogus microservice, pretending to be the order processing microservice. So if this microservice makes a request to the inventory microservice with the same payload, with the same message, the inventory microservice will not know how to identify whether this is coming from a bogus microservice or the genuine order processing microservice. So to solve this problem, mutual TLS is something we use in gRPC, so that the inventory microservice knows that it is being talked to by entities that it trusts. So let's see how we can quickly enable MTLS between two communicating microservices over gRPC. So, like I said before, we'll be using samples of chapter 8 here of the book. So, if you go to chapter 8 of the book, you can see these samples. So, we'll run a set of examples and see what it looks like. So, first, I'm going to compile the samples in sample 2 in chapter 8. So let me increase the size of it a bit. So execute this command. So you can find all of these instructions on the book itself to compile the samples. So these samples are in Java. Most of the samples are in Java, and we use Spring Boot mostly for these applications. So I have my microservices compiled. And then the next step is to create the certificates that are needed for the client and the server. So going back to this picture, so in this case the client becomes, we are talking about the communication between these two entities. So in this case the client becomes the order processing microservice, and the server becomes the inventory microservice. So let's create the certificates that we need for the client and the server. So we have this shell script available in the samples that will basically create the certificates that are needed for the client and the server. First, it creates a CA, basically the certificate of authority, and the keys that represent the certificate authority. And once that is done, it will basically create the certificates and the key stores for the client and the server respectively. So it takes a little bit of time. As you are doing it, so we can see the CA certificate has been created. So we are basically creating the certificates for this entity and this entity, and we are going to install them and trying to get the communication working between the two. Okay. All right, it looks like our certificates are created. So now the next step, we are going to start the server process. So we have this command that starts the server process. So let me paste it here. So if you observe this command closely, so we are basically executing a process and we are passing in this parameter, which is to be the host and the port of the server process, and we are passing in 3 more variables, which would be the server certificate, the certificate container, which contains the private key of the server, and the CA certificate as well. So the CA certificate is needed to trust the incoming client communications. So let's go ahead and start the server process. So as you can see here, it says the server is started. And then let's go and start the client process. So as I mentioned before, the client becomes the order processing service here. We just started the inventory service, and now we are going to start the order processing microservice. So as we start it, it will basically simulate a request, and you will we are supposed to see some logs on the server to make sure that the client request has been processed. So similar to start in the server, when we start the client here, we pass in the connection details of the server, which is the host and the port. And again, similar to the server, we pass in the CA certificate, the client certificate, and the client certificate container. So let's go ahead and start the client process. So as you can see here, we get a message saying updated inventory for one product. So this is the response, and here on the server side we see received order ID 1, which means the communication has happened between the two, and the inventory has been updated. So now we can again verify this by trying to run the client in TLS only mode. So in TLS only mode, what happens is the communication channel becomes encrypted. However, the mutual TLS doesn't happen. So mutual TLS, so in a traditional TLS scenario, what happens is the client verifies the authenticity of the server, and that's it. The communication becomes encrypted, the channel becomes encrypted, but the server does not verify the client back in return. So in TLS only mode, the client needs the server certificate, but the server doesn't need the client certificate to verify, because it's only the client that verifies the server. So if you try to run the client in TLS only mode, which means so about this command, but this command is what I'm talking about. So if you start the client with just the CA certificate, so that it can trust the server, but it cannot basically present its server certificate to the server. We are supposed to see an error here, an authentication error. So as you can see here, we are saying we are getting a connection refused because mutual TLS has failed. in this instance, because although the client can trust the server cannot trust the client in this particular instance, because we started the client without specifying its key store locations. So that's basically how you can enable mutual TLS. So if you quickly look at the code of this, so again these samples are on GitHub. You can go and have a look at them. So this is basically the inventory client class. So as I mentioned before, the samples are in Java. If you're familiar with Java, you can understand them, but you don't really need to have any Java knowledge to run these examples. So we have this build SSL context method, which is supposed to return an SSL context object coming from the netty package. So we initialize, or rather we set all of the our certificate files into this builder and return it. So this method is being used by the constructor, which passes this information into netty. So that's basically how you initialize the client, and the server initialization also happens in a similar fashion. So you have this get SSL context builder, which basically builds the SSL context, and then this is being used by the server start method by passing in those particular details into the netty server process. So that's basically some samples of the code that we used. So let's go into the next section, which is about securing gRPC communications through JWT. So one of the other methods of securing gRPC communications is to use JWTs. So in that case, what will happen is, instead of using a mutual TLS, or in addition to using mutual TLS, the communication between these two entities is secured using a JWT, or what we call a JSON Web Token. So in that kind of a flow, what happens is, usually a client would get a JWT from the STS, or the STS known as an IDP. You can think of the STS as an IDP that can issue OAuth access tokens in the form of JWTs. So a client would get a JWT and pass it through to the order processing microservice through an API gateway. And usually this JWT would be validated here, and it will be passed along downstream, or rather upstream. And at this point, now the order processing microservice needs to talk to the inventory microservice, but it cannot use the same JWT generally, because this JWT was used for the purpose of accessing the order processing microservice only. And what would happen at this point is, the order processing service would exchange the JWT it gets for another JWT that is used to talk to the inventory microservice. So this is what will happen in a JWT based security scenario. So in mutual TLS, while it's useful to identify the client, it's hard to pass in other context information that could be necessary for the functionality of the respective microservice. So for example, if the microservice needs to know additional information of the entity that is accessing it, there is no way to get that information, or it's not straightforward. So that is one other benefit with JWT, and also it allows you to scope the JWT. So if you're familiar with OAuth 2 and scopes, you will know what scopes is. It's a mechanism of setting permissions for the token of what it can do. So that is one other additional benefit of JWT, where you can scope the JWT so that it can only do the actions that it is allowed to do in the system. So that's also another mechanism. So we'll quickly go through some samples of how you can get a JWT and access these microservices. So we have a sample STS built here under sample 3 of the same chapter. We have an STS. So I'll quickly go and start the STS process. While that's starting, we'll let it to start and check if there are any questions here at the moment. All right, I think we have the STS started. So next we'll go ahead and get a JWT token to access our microservice. So we copy this command here, which gets us a token. So this curl command can be used. So this is a what we call a request to the token endpoint of the STS, and we use the OAuth2 protocol here. So we are using a username Peter and a random scope name foo to get an access token. So if you issue this command, we get an access token here. So what you get here in the response in a JSON contains the access token. So let me copy the access token, which is from here to here. Let's copy it. Right. So we are good to go. So we can basically shut down the STS now as we have the token. And then just as before, we can go ahead and start the server process. So before that, let me go and set the token here. So I'm setting the token in the terminal context for later use. If I do an echo $token, I should see the value here. Yes, we are good. All right, so let's go and start the server process. So I'm not going to recompile these applications because they've already been compiled. All right, the server is started. Now let's go and start the client process. And if you notice here, I'm going to start when I'm starting the client process, I'm passing in the value of the token into the client process. Let's just go ahead and execute this and see if it's successful. So as you can see, it is successful now. The client is now talking to the server, or rather the client in this case becomes the order processing service, is now talking to the inventory microservice using a JWT. And you basically see the JWT log here. So if you omit the JWT part from the client, you should see an authentication error. So as you can see here, you get a unauthenticated error here, and that is because the client is now missing the JWT. So let's go to the code to see how this works. So in gRPC, so in HTTP we are familiar with the concept of headers, where the client would add HTTP headers to the request, and these kinds of JWTs are passed in headers. But in the case of gRPC, the concept is a little bit different. So we have this thing called gRPC metadata. So the gRPC payload, or the proto files protobufs will have the message content or the message payload, and these kinds of additional information, what are similar to the things that we use in HTTP headers, are passed in these things called gRPC metadata. So if you look at this class called JWT client interceptor, so again this is from sample 3 of the chapter 8. So you can go to GitHub and basically take a look at these samples. So we use this thing called a JWT client interceptor. So this JWT client interceptor gets invoked just before a request goes out from the JWT or from the gRPC client. And then you see here within this method, we are setting some metadata. So you see the metadata object coming in here, and we call it headers just for addressing purposes. And then we put this JWT key here into the gRPC metadata. So our JWT gets embedded or gets put into the gRPC metadata from the client through this client interceptor. And on the server side, we have a similar interceptor which gets invoked just when the request is received on the server side. So similar to a client interceptor, we have something called a server interceptor here, and the server interceptor has a similar method called intercept, and then it gets this metadata. So as you can see here, and from the metadata we extract out the token, and then we validate the token before processing our request. So that's basically how you engage server interceptors and client interceptors into two entities that are communicating between each other using gRPC. So this example is again on Java, but on other languages also you have similar concepts where you can use interceptors to intercept gRPC requests and perform these kinds of validations. So that's basically that basically covers our section on gRPC based security. And we'll next move on into talking about request or rather event driven or reactive microservices. So in a typical microservice architecture, what we use mostly are request response based microservices. So what would happen in such a scenario, if you look at a similar example as you're seeing on the screen here, is so once an order is processed, the order processing microservice would talk to the relevant other internal microservices to get its job done. So it will talk to the inventory microservice for updating the inventory. It will talk to the shipping microservice to make sure the shipping is done, and so on. So in this kind of a system, you always get new requirements and requests for changes, right? So what if you have a new requirement to update the buying history or identify the buying patterns of your customers, right? So what you will typically do is you will write that new functionality in a new microservice called the buying history microservice in this particular case, and then the order processing microservice would now have to talk to that too, in addition to talking to the other two microservice for this new functionality. So as we know, this is not ideal, as we can realize, because with this kind of an architecture, you have to keep changing the order processing microservice every time there's a new requirement. So it becomes a single point of failure, and it has too many responsibilities, which is not ideal in a microservice architecture, and so on. And most of these functionality are things that can be done asynchronously, meaning that they don't have to be done uh, at the time the order is being processed. They can even be done later after the order has been processed. So to solve this problem of becoming a single point of failure and of too many changes, we use this pattern called reactive microservices or event driven microservice. So in that architecture, in that pattern, what happens is the order processing microservice would uh, notify a broker whenever an order has been processed. So it will basically just be focused on its own logic, which could be related to updating the order tables, processing the payment, and so on. And once it is done, it will basically take all of that information it captured and notify a broker saying this particular order has been processed. And there will be other microservices that are listening to events that are happening on the system by listening to a topic or something on the broker. So they will basically get notified whenever an event has happened, and they'll basically start executing their own logic. So that's basically how a typical reactive or an event driven system would work. So as you can see here, the order processing microservice is not even aware of the other microservices in the system. The only thing it cares about is its own logic and then notifying a broker. So we can easily bring in new requirements into the system through this architecture without having to change or modify the order processing microservice. So this is basically where technologies like Apache Kafka or NATS in ATS comes into the picture. So in the book we use Apache Kafka mostly for most of the samples, and we use talk about NATS later as well at the end of chapter 9. So Apache Kafka, it's an open source distributed streaming platform. So it has these entities called topics in Kafka. So you can basically we basically use this kind of a sample throughout the samples in chapter 9, where a client makes a request to the order processing microservice and it talks to a topic in Kafka, and there's a microservice called buying history which listens to events here and gets it. So let's quickly go ahead and see what this looks like in action. So we can now shut these processors down. And we have to go and start the Kafka process. So Kafka comes in as two processors. So there's a coordinator process called Zookeeper. So we have to start the coordinator process first. So all of these, we are now basically executing samples of chapter 9 in the book. So once Zookeeper is up and running, we basically then go and start the Kafka server. So when Kafka starts, it connects to Zookeeper and informs that of its existence. So we can go and have a look at the list of topics available in Kafka. So now the server process is up and running. So we have this script called Kafka topics, which we can use to list the topics available in Kafka. So there's this orders topic, which is what we'll be using for the samples here. This is something we created, and the other one is something that comes out of the box by default with Kafka. So we have our Kafka server up and running. The next step is to go and start our microservices, which is the order processing microservice and the buying history microservice. So let us go here into sample 1. And start the order processing microservice. And in sample 2, we have the buying history microservice. So let's go and start that microservice as well. All right, looks like both our microservices are up and running. So next, I'm just going to go here and enable a packet capture to show you something, this communication. So this is basically Wireshark, and it's we are going to capture the packets that are being transferred over the network when executing our next sample. So we are listening to port 9092, which is basically the plain text port of Kafka. So we haven't enabled any security yet. We are just going to execute the sample first. So now the next step, I'm going to simulate this client and make a request to the order processing microservice using this curl command here. So go in here and execute this curl command. So if you can see, this made a request to the order processing microservice, and it returned a 201, which means the order has been successfully placed, and you see some logs on the server side here as well, which means our request has been successful. So what just happened was the client sent a request to the order processing microservice. It notified Kafka, and then the buying history microservice was also updated, and you can see the log here saying the buying history has been updated. So this communication is now working, but we have a problem here, which I'll try to explain through this the Wireshark. So if you look here, this basically has captured the communication or the network interfaces, and you can see the messages here that went in, the request and the response. So if you observe this network, you can see that the data being transferred over the network is in plain text. So anyone who has access to the network can now see the messages that are being passed through. So this is not ideal, and we don't want this to happen. We ideally want this channel to be encrypted. So to make that happen, we enable TLS for Kafka. So let's go ahead and see how we can enable TLS for Kafka. So let's shut down these two microservices. And we have this container which we use in the samples of the book. That we use to generate keys. So the first step is to enable TLS is to go ahead and generate the keys for our services, for basically Kafka and the other two microservices. So we use this OpenSSL container for generating these keys. So as you can see here, it's generating the CA key, and then the server key, and finally the client key, basically the certificates for the buying history microservice. So we are now done. We basically created the keys. Now let's go ahead and copy these keys into the respective microservices. So copy the certificates of the order processing microservice, and then the buying history microservice. So we are going to execute sample 3 of the chapter now, of chapter 9. Now, since we refreshed our keys, we basically have to restart our Kafka server. So let's go ahead and restart Kafka. So while that is shutting down, let me show you the Kafka configuration file. So what you see here is the Kafka configuration file. So you see on the top here the port that it listens on, like the plain text port becomes 9092, and the SSL port is 9093, and you have the key store and the key store location and the key store's password specified here in these two configurations. So the Kafka is down. Let's bring it back up again, and while that is happening, we can basically go to the sample 3, the orders microservice. All right, Kafka is up now, so we can basically start our orders microservice, and then in sample 3 again, we go to the buying history microservice, and we can start the buying history microservice as well. So we are starting the microservices in sample 3 now, basically the same things as before, but with SSL TLS enabled right now. And while that is starting up, let's go and set up a new packet capture. So this time for port 9093, because we are going to be communicating over SSL now. Okay, that's going on. Looks like our processors are up and running. So we'll now go and simulate the client by executing this curl command. So if we go here and execute this curl command again as before, see what happens. So we get a 201 and we can see the buying history has been updated. Now this time if we go to the packet capture, we can see there are some other messages going on as well for SSL related. Now if we take a look at these messages, you can see you can inspect their content and you can see all of them are now encrypted. There's nothing going on in plain text. These are not human readable, so the channel has been encrypted and nobody can sniff the packets going on in the network at the moment. So that's basically how you encrypt the communication channels in Kafka. So you have to enable that in the configuration, Kafka configuration file here. Now, although we encrypted the communication channel, it is still possible for a bogus microservice to pretend that it is the orders microservice or someone else. So similar to before, to address that particular problem, we have to use MTLS with Kafka. So doing that requires some additional configurations on the Kafka side. So that is what you're seeing right here. So Kafka has this configuration called client auth enabled to say, and we enable this, and when we enable client authentication, what we are effectively saying is we are asking Kafka to authenticate the client, which is not something it did before. And to do that, we need to tell Kafka the trust store, its trust store location. So its trust store has the certificates of the clients it trusts. So we enable that particular configuration and then provide the trust store password as well. So with these three configurations, we can enable mutual TLS on Kafka. So let's stop the packet capture now. So once these three configurations are enabled, we have to basically go and restart Kafka because we did a configuration change. So Kafka is down and let's go ahead and restart it. Yep, it's up again. So let's microservices are up. We didn't restart these microservices. So let me show you some code in the microservices as well. So this is basically the code of our buying history and orders microservices. Like I said, they are in Java in Spring Boot. So the most important, I won't go into the code. I'll just show you the important configuration file here. So under each microservice, there's this application.properties configuration file, which has the configuration details of connecting to Kafka. So we see here the microservice port and the other details that it needs to connect to Kafka. And to enable mutual TLS, you need to enable these three properties: the Kafka key store location, the key store location of the respective microservice, and the password. So you have to enable these two properties for both the microservices, as you can see here, to enable mutual TLS. So it had already been enabled, so I don't have to go and re-enable it. So let's just quickly verify simulate our client, and as you can see, this now works with mutual TLS enabled on the Kafka side. So basically now we have this situation enabled where only trusted microservices can talk to Kafka. So that's basically about setting up MTLS for Kafka. It's a simple configuration once you have the certificates defined. But we still have a problem even with mutual TLS enabled, meaning that any trusted microservice can perform any action on Kafka even with the mutual TLS enabled. So for example, the buying history microservice can also add entries into this orders topic in Kafka, which is not a situation that we want to have. We need to set up authorization for Kafka so that only permitted entities are permitted to do the respective actions on the Kafka side, meaning that we need to ensure that the buying history microservice can only read messages from this topic and it cannot write messages to this topic. But the order processing microservice should be able to write messages into this topic as well. So to set this up, we have what we call ACLs in Kafka, or access control list. So a Kafka ACL is something that is defined as where a principal is basically an entity that is trying to perform an action. Principal P is either allowed or denied an operation O. So an operation is an action basically. It could be writing a message, reading a message, and so on from a host. So a host is basically the IP address of the principal, like of the person, whether it's going to entity that's going to perform the action on a resource or on any resource R. So resource is something like a topic in Kafka, which matches the resource pattern identified by RP. So the resource pattern is something that is used to identify the resource that this is going to be applied on. So for example, the name of the topic, right, in our case orders. So to apply these ACLs, the most important thing here is to understand how Kafka identifies the client. So we used X509 certificates to secure the communication to Kafka. We use X509 certificates for the order processing and the buying history microservices. Now, when using MTLS, Kafka by default uses what is known as the distinguished name of the client. So if you're familiar with certificates, you know a certificate has various attributes called the common name, the OU, and all of that, right? So basically, the combination of all of this information is known as the distinguished name, and it by default uses this distinguished name of the client to identify it, right? But we can override this rule through a configuration in Kafka, and we can ask it to use a certain part of this distinguished name only to identify the client. So for example, we are going to use this example here. We are going to say, ask Kafka to use only the common name, which is identified by this $1 character. Basically do a regular expression on it and match it in lowercase, right? Extract the common name of the client that is connecting and match it in lowercase against the ACL that we are going to define on Kafka. So basically the first step is to decide on how we are going to identify the client and configure Kafka based on that decision. So let me quickly go to the Kafka configuration file, and if you go to this section, you see this configuration called principal mapping rule, which basically defines how we want to identify our client. So in this case, we are going to use the CN only. And then we have to define the ACLs on Kafka. So Kafka by default comes with a script that allows us to add ACLs. So what we are going to do here is to add some ACLs to Kafka to say the order processing microservice can read and write to the orders topic. The buying history microservice can only read from the orders topic. So if you look at this command here, we pass in to this command the zookeeper connection details and also the principal. So we say add principal, where the user is identified by this string bh.ecom.com, which is the CN of the buying history microservice, and we specify the operation saying read and the RP or the resource pattern, which is the name of the topic, saying orders. So once we add this, we can basically ensure that the buying history microservice can only read from the respective topic. So let's go and set up these ACLs on Kafka. So before doing that, we'll take a look at the CN of the buying history microservice just to understand what we are talking about here. So let's execute this key tool command. Ask for the passphrase. So if you notice here, we have the basically the certificate of the buying history microservice inside this key store, and its CN goes as bh.ecom.com, right? So that's basically just to show how the CN, and these commands will basically help us to set up the ACS on Kafka. So before we do that, we can go ahead and see if there are any existing ACS already for the orders topic. So if we execute this command, we get an empty list right now because we don't have any ACS for the orders topic. So let's go and add some ACS. So first, let's go and add an ACL to tell Kafka that the order processing microservice is a producer to this topic. So if we execute this command, it will basically go and tell Kafka that the entity identified by orders.ecom.com, in this case, which is the order processing microservice, has read, write, and create rights on the orders topic, right? So the order processing microservice is sorted now. The next is to set the ACS for the buying history microservice. So let's go and execute that. So we execute this to say the buying history microservice can only read from the orders topic. So we see the ACS now on the orders topic. So there are 4 ACS which says the orders microservice can read, write, and describe the orders topic, and the buying history microservice can only read from the orders topic. So that's basically how you set access control lists or set authorization for topics on Kafka. So we can now basically go and verify whether our system is still working fine by executing this command here. So we just simulated an order again, and we can see that it is working perfectly fine, because we are now ensured that we are now ensure this scenario where the order processing microservice can only write and the buying history microservice can only read from the orders topic. So that basically concludes the samples that we have in chapter 8 and chapter 9 of the book. So like I said, all of these samples you can find from here, from GitHub microservices security in action, and if you go into the samples directory, you can see samples of all the chapters. And what we used in this particular session were samples from chapter 8 and chapter 9 of the book. So you can find all of the information in the samples. So that concludes my session for today. I hope it has been an interesting one for you, and you can basically try these out yourselves as well. So all of the instructions along with further explanations are provided in the book. You can go ahead and have a look at it, and you can get in touch with me on Twitter as well. So my Twitter ID goes as Nuwandias, Nuwandias, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So it doesn't look like we have any questions on the chat here. So thanks everyone for joining in. I hope it has been an interesting session, and if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with either me or Prabhat, and we'll be very happy to help you with any questions you have. Thank you so much and have a nice day.